What if I told you that your brain makes up its mind before you do? Today, we're digging into a fascinating experiment from the 80s that put one of our deepest beliefs, our own free will, right under the microscope. All right, think about this for a second. The last choice you made, maybe to take a sip of your drink or just to shift in your seat, that felt like you deciding to do it, didn't it? Well, what if there's a plot twist? For decades, a really famous experiment suggested that feeling of control might not be the whole story. This whole thing taps into a debate that's as old as time itself. On one side, you've got free will, the idea that we're in the driver's seat, consciously choosing our actions. And on the other side, there's determinism, the idea that everything we do is just the result of a long chain of dominoes that started falling long before we were even born. For centuries, this was purely philosophical until science decided to get involved.
And that's our cue to jump to the 1980s and meet a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet. He came up with his brilliantly simple experiment to do something that sounds impossible. He wanted to time a thought. He wanted to find the exact moment a conscious decision gets made in the brain.
So how in the world did he do it? Well, it was actually pretty clever. First, he had people wear an EEG cap, which basically just measures the electrical chatter happening in their brain. Second, he had them stare at a special clock with a little dot spinning around it super fast. Third, their only job was to just flex their wrist whenever they felt the spontaneous urge to do it. And here's the kicker. Step 4, they had to remember and report exactly where that spinning dot was on the clock the very instant they felt the will to move. Now, the specific thing Libet was looking for is a brain signal called the readiness potential. It's this slow, creeping buildup of electrical activity that scientists already knew happens right before you make a voluntary movement. You can kind of think of it as the brain warming up its engines before it hits the gas. So Libet's big question was simple. What happens first? Do we feel the conscious urge to move, and then the brain's engine starts warming up, or is it the other way around? The answer he found sent shockwaves through neuroscience and philosophy that we're still talking about today. He found a gap between the brain starting to prepare for an action and the person actually feeling like they decided to act. And that gap was about 350 milliseconds. It might not sound like a lot, but in brain time, that's an eternity. So let's just walk through this timeline, because this is what blew everyone's mind. At about half a second before the wrist even moved, the readiness potential, that brain warm-up, kicked off. But the person only reported feeling the conscious urge to move at around 200 milliseconds before the action. You see the gap? The brain was already getting the ball rolling completely unconsciously, a full third of a second before the person felt like they had even made a decision. And boom, just like that, the whole debate exploded. I mean, if your brain is starting the process of an action before you are even aware of it, what does that say about free will? Is that feeling of being in control just a story we tell ourselves after the fact to make sense of what our brain was already doing? Now, a lot of people took this finding and ran with it. Thinkers like Sam Harris interpreted this to mean something really profound. Some moments before you are aware of what you will do next, your brain has already determined what you will do. From this point of view, our sense of making a choice is just an illusion, a trick of the mind. But, and this is a really important but, Libet himself never went that far. He had a different idea. He suggested that, okay, maybe we don't have free will to start an action, but maybe we have free won't. He thought that in that tiny little window between feeling the urge and actually moving, our consciousness could jump in and act like a gatekeeper and hit the brakes. We could veto the urge. As you can imagine, though, the scientific community immediately started poking holes in the experiment. People raised some really good points, like how accurately can you really time a vague internal feeling like an urge? And is a random wrist flex really the same kind of decision as, say, choosing who to marry? Plus, some argue that this readiness potential might not be a decision signal at all, but just random background noise in the brain that we're misinterpreting. All of these critiques were super important because they sparked a whole new wave of experiments. Scientists were determined to figure this out, and they came up with new ways to tackle the problem. The story wasn't over. And the big breakthrough came from this simple question. What if a clock is just the wrong tool for the job? I mean, what if trying to pinpoint the start of a feeling to a single instant is the real problem? Maybe an intention isn't a flash of lightning, but more like a sunrise that happens gradually. So scientists got creative. They developed something called the tone probe method. Instead of a clock, people would hear random beeps at unpredictable times. And the rule was simple. If you hear a beep and you're already feeling an intention to move your wrist, you have to stop yourself. You have to veto the action. This was a genius way to catch the absolute earliest, faintest whispers of an intention forming. And the results from this new method? They totally rewrote the timeline. It turns out that conscious intention doesn't just pop up 200 milliseconds before an action. No, it begins to form way, way earlier, around 2 full seconds before the movement. And what's really fascinating is that this is right around the same time the brain's own preparatory activity starts to ramp up. The gap, it disappeared.
So, here's the big takeaway. An intention isn't a single point in time that Libet's clock was trying to catch. It's a process that unfolds over time. What Libet's experiment was probably measuring wasn't the start of the decision, but the final moment, the point of no return, right before the action happens.
This gives us a much more elegant picture. It's perfectly summed up by the neuroscientist E.J. Nafsi. You and your brain decide together. It's not your unconscious brain deciding for you. It's a collaboration. That brain activity isn't some secret plan happening behind your back. It's the physical process of you forming an intention. So, the experiment that once looked like it had killed free will has actually led us to a much more interesting place. But it does leave us with one last, kind of mind-bending question to chew on. If you and your brain aren't two separate things in a fight, if you are your brain's activity, then who or what is the you that's making the choice in the first place?